Welcome to the Descenso Zone podcast, where we talk about creativity and personal growth through a lens of curiosity and humor. My guest today is an award-winning actor with nearly 25 years experience. You've seen him star in shows like Naturally Sadie and Overruled, and guest star on shows like Designated Survivor, What We Do in the Shadows, Life with Luca, and more. He's also a longtime acting coach at the prestigious Lewis Baumander Acting Studio in Toronto. We talk about his journey into becoming an actor, the craft of acting and coaching, and film industry insights like the impact of AI. Now, let's get into the zone with Jacob Kraemer. Jacob Kraemer. So we met on a family/Disney Channel show called Naturally Sadie. This was back around 2004, 2005.
Somewhere around there, yeah.
Yeah, and since then you've continued your acting career and taken up coaching at the prestigious Lewis Baumander Acting Studio. As someone who got into acting as a kid as well, I want to ask, how did that happen for you? What was the spark that sort of ignited your love for acting?
It was super organic. It was kind of a little bit surprising even. I was always kind of the kid who was bouncing around, wild imagination, the kind of cliched story. Um, but one of the things that became just like almost an inside joke with my family, even like my dad and my mom and I, like we would watch a movie and then for the next week or so, if we really loved it, it would just be like constant references to lines and like working them into conversation. And it was always just this kind of quick back and forth. And like I would drop a line and my mom would pick it up, or I would drop a line, my dad would pick it up, vice versa, all of that fun stuff. And I was just kind of like, wait, people actually, this is fun, you know? And I can make a go at this maybe. And my parents were like, well, I mean, like, you're 10, 11 years old and you wanted to be an astronaut 3 days ago. So let's maybe pump the brakes on this a little bit. But it just never went away. Right. And I grew up in a small town you've probably never heard of called Fonthill, just outside of Niagara Falls. So not super close to Toronto. So there was a lot of logistics that kind of had to go into a lot of this. And obviously my parents playing a large role in that as I was 12 or 11, I think, when it really kind of started to kick off. But the stars aligned and it was a couple years later and they were like, is this something you are still interested, something you still really want to do? And I was like, yeah, like I'm still just having fun. And we took a go at it and they shouldered most of the burden, as I'm sure you also are quite grateful to your folks for as well. Um,
Absolutely.
and yeah, like my mom put in a ton of research into agencies in the city, took me to a couple of meetings, things started to work out, a little bit of luck bounced my way. And then and here I am almost 25 years later, still still stuck, if you will. No, still I love it still, right? It's a lot of fun. And I think that's been the key for me over the years is that I still try and find as much space to have fun and enjoy it as much as I possibly can because it's very competitive. It is a lot of work and it's hard work and there's a ton of rejection. There's a ton of difficult conversations and difficult experiences. But if you can still maintain some level of enjoyment, some level of fun out of and remember why you did it in the first place, then it just doesn't go away.
It really resonates with me, your sort of origin story, because it's similar for me as well, where I would watch in particular Jim Carrey movies. I grew up in the 90s like you, so
Hmm.
there was like that string of like Ace Ventura, The Mask, Dumb and Dumber that kind of all came out in that same like 1994, 1995.
Hmm.
And I would memorize those movies. That and the Austin Powers movies too. I would memorize those movies and just recite the lines like you did. And my parents were like, "We don't know what to do with this," right?
We need an
And
outlet.
yeah, we need to give this kid an outlet, right? So we can only show him off to our family friends, every weekend or whatever. He needs an outlet more than that. So they put me in a theater camp in Hamilton, where I grew up, and from there, actually Noah Reed, who
Hmm.
you worked with him on a few projects, I think, right? On
Yeah, a couple on
Old,
Sadie for
Old
sure,
Stock,
and Old Stock. Yeah.
who's gone on to do great things and has an awesome music career and acting career and stuff. He and I worked on one of my first plays together. And it was because his agent came to see him in the play
Hmm.
that's how I ended up getting an agent. So it's funny how things work like that.
Yeah, I don't think I knew that story. That's incredible.
But yeah, I totally had that same kind of sense and that same like wonder about it, like, oh wow, people can actually get paid to do this. And it was a really cool thing. And luck also came my way, but I mean, don't sell yourself too short. I think you had some talent.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, what do you think as an actor was like, you mentioned the rejection thing, like how
Mhm.
important is that? Because rejection is such an ongoing, consistent part of the job.
Mhm.
How do you deal with that as someone who probably has to go to tons of auditions and get rejections all the time?
From an acting point of view, and I will hit on the luck a little bit in this answer, I think, too. But from an acting point of view, I think one of the biggest things to remember and remind yourself is there's so many different things, there are so many different decisions that go into a single casting decision. You know, you can go and you can do this audition and be excellent, and you've done everything you possibly could. You've attended to every little piece of this project that you possibly could walking into that space, and at the end of the day, you just might not be right for it. Or, you came in and you're amazing. The problem is earlier this morning, we made our decision on who the lead of the film is going to be, who is your parent, and you look nothing like them, right? The first major project I ever worked on was a film called The Elizabeth Smart Story, right? Um, Incredible experience. My first ever serious acting gig, and I went and spent a month living in Halifax, and so on site, on location, the whole deal, and it was an incredible learning experience and all of that. But I am pretty confident the main cause of me getting that role is because the look fit, right? I was playing a person who existed in real life. I looked a lot like him, and they had already cast the woman to play Elizabeth. And when we were out in public, people thought we were siblings. So it worked out. And I know you're going to say something. I know part of the reason is that because I watched the movie when it was, when it came out, and a lot of my stuff got cut.
Yeah, I mean that's just part of the deal though.
Yeah.
Stuff gets cut all the time, and
Oh, absolutely.
it's just part of the deal. But I think you have to give yourself some credit, even as a kid, because I'm sure that as a kid, your acting chops aren't fully formed, and I
No,
think
for
the
sure.
adults know that, right? And so as long as you have like the look, yes, but also a sense of it.
Mhm.
Like you can always kind of tell if someone is a terrible actor, or even non-actors. It's like even non-actors watching, or people who are not even in the industry, just the average viewer will watch something and they can cringe at something if they're like, ooh, this feels inauthentic, or this feels
Mhm.
wrong, or this just doesn't feel like a good performance. It's really interesting to me because it's like you don't know the inner workings of how that performance, why it's bad, but you know that something's off.
Mhm.
Is there anything that like you can point to, or something that you share with your students that's like how to overcome that?
Yeah, one of the jokes that I talk about at the studio a lot, and I say it this way for a couple of reasons. I mean, the first one is I'm not always the most poetic person on the planet, but I also just enjoy the rise it gets out of people sometimes. But I tell people a lot, like, especially if I'm teaching a much more kind of entry level sort of beginner course at the studio, I don't have any interest in acting or actors. I don't think that's interesting. The performances aren't, you know, in quotes, performances, that's not interesting. Humans are interesting,
Right.
right? You as a human being, and look, all of your characters, even though you may be playing somebody who existed in real life, sure, that person exists, but for the vast majority of projects, these characters as ideas are just that. They're ideas. It's ink on a page. It's not a real thing until you make it something real. Right. And so the idea behind that for me has always just been, okay, like I am being tasked with exploring this set of circumstances. And the only way that I know how to do it in any sort of genuine way is to allow myself to actually just go through it how I want to go through it and not worry about at that time when we're speaking, audition wise, because of course, when you get onto sets, then now you've got your director and you've got producers and stuff, and everybody's got their ideas on things. But as far as auditioning goes, the only thing you can really know for sure and for certain is how you feel and experience these scenes, these experiences, these sets of circumstances. So being able to let go of this pressure or this fear of getting it wrong and allowing yourself, I know it's really easy for me to sit here and say, um, but the practice is it just in that sort of unreserved, unapologetic openness, then, back to the conversation of just kind of recognizing that there are so many different things that go into an audition or a casting decision, excuse me, then you can be proud of the work you've done, right? And back to this idea that it's not necessarily, it's just that you may not necessarily be right for it, sure, but a lot of times, even when you're auditioning for a casting director, and they're gonna see that authenticity. They're gonna see that sense of, that strong sense that you have of who you are. And then another project comes down the line and they're like, oh, I know who I want to see for this.
Right. So in a way, it's like every audition is not just an audition for that audition. It's an audition for all future auditions with that
Pretty
casting
much.
director.
Yeah.
When you are doing an audition or when you're coaching someone, do you advise them to look inward and try and relate personally to the character, or do you advise them to sort of attempt to step into the situation of that character?
So where it gets kind of tricky, I find, is with the idea of relating, is people tend to take it very literally, right? And that's come into a buzzword kind of area with acting. This is me personally. Um, because if I give you a situation, say, you've just woken up. This is your scene, right? You've just woken up. You're realizing that you are in a spaceship light years from home and are now going to be used as some sort of pawn in some sort of interplanetary war.
Hard to relate to that.
Speaking for myself, I don't know what you've been up to these past few years. I can't relate to that. I don't know exactly how I would deal in that situation. So what I do and what we talk about a lot at the studio is one of an actor's greatest tools is their empathy and their curiosity. And what comes along with these ideas of like that scenario that I presented, well, there's fear there. There's anxiety. There's probably some anger. There's confusion. Those are all things we've all experienced at any given time in our lives. So it's just starting to kind of more associatively experience these things in the way that we do when we watch film and television, right? You're not watching Game of Thrones being like, I know what that's like. No, you're being like, wow, that person's going through a pretty awful time and I feel bad for them.
But you can empathize with them in a weird way, even if you haven't, lived in a medieval era and had a sword thrust at you. You have this
Exactly.
sense of empathy, right, with these characters.
Exactly, right? So it's just that associative nature, that human integrity, that human empathy that allows us to experience feeling fully and completely from a first person point of view and not looking so externally at these characters as if like what should they be doing? It's rather how do I feel? How do I experience this conversation? What does this effectively, trigger in me as a human being?
It sounds like it's sort of more about a core emotional response as opposed to the outward situation that it's in. It's like you can relate to feeling fear or anger or happiness or whatever, and you can use that to like inject into the character. Is that sort of what you're saying?
Essentially, yeah, this idea that, what I like to talk about a lot is not so much now, putting myself into the character's shoes, as it were, but rather getting these characters out of me, right? And so there's that, yeah, like that core emotional experience, that core thought, right? It's one of the things that we discuss a lot at the studio is, what are you thinking? Right? You're coming into this situation. What is the actual thought that you have as a human being? Is it, I don't want to be here? Is that I can't believe this has happened? I can't believe you did this to me, right? Like all of these things that we unconsciously a lot of the time think and go through in our day to day, but we're not thinking in the sense of like, look sad,
Right.
right? Repeating think sad thoughts over and over in your head, not really gonna make you sad.
Right. What about listening? Because I feel like maybe some of the inauthenticity that we see on
Mhm.
screen stems from this idea of actors waiting for their turn to say their line.
Mhm.
How important is listening as an actor to the other person? And when I say listening, I guess I sort of mean like not just hearing them, but like a deeper kind of listening where you're
Hmm.
sort of invested in what they're saying as opposed to just kind of waiting for your turn to speak. Because at least when I was acting, granted I was a kid, but I think I fell into that sometimes where I was like, oh, my line's coming up. And you like,
Mhm.
you're in your head about that sometimes.
Yeah, 100%. And it's that the kind of age-old question is like, how do I look like I'm listening?
Right.
Right. And I'll tell actors a lot. I'm like, if you want me to be like super frank about it, you just listen. Just listen to what I have to say. Think about it. Right. Now, obviously, that's a very surface level engagement in that way, but it just kind of starts with that and recognizing, when you're reading through your scripts and you are reading, the reader's lines or the other character's lines in there, even just if you take note of like what your thoughts are while you're reading those things. Right? Or even if you take note of like how you feel while reading what's being said to you, and then you get that up on its feed, and now you're working with another actor, and you're actually relinquishing a little bit of control of the scene over to them. One of my classes at the studio is a scene study where two actors are always paired together and they go up together, and you start to realize how much work you can let the other do as well. Right? And if they're bringing their most authentic self, it really doesn't actually take a ton of effort in the sense that we think it does to like contort our face and do all of these things, but rather you get to just look them in the eye, talk to them, listen to what they have to say, and think about it critically like you would any other interaction in your life. Right. Now, one of the fun little ways that I like to kind of play with people with that too, sometimes if they're really starting to like get caught in this, like I have to like, is I'll take a Sharpie and on all of like, so say we're doing a scene together, right? I'll take a Sharpie and I'll grab your script and on all of my lines, I'll black all of it out, save for the last like 3, 4 words. So now you don't know what I'm going to say,
That's
right?
interesting.
And so just as an exercise, now you are actually genuinely forced to kind of take in the information from a first person point of view and listen to what I have to say and understand what's going on rather than, like you said, waiting for your turn to talk or waiting to hear the cue word.
What you're saying reminds me of a scene in The Godfather, funny
Mhm.
enough, where Pacino is in the bathroom going to get the gun to make the kill. And I saw an interview about this where they said that, I guess he had done it a couple times, but because he knew where the gun was, it felt contrived because he would just
Mhm.
reach for the gun and grab it and go. And so what they did was they hid it from him. They put it in a different spot than they told him it was in. So when he reached, he wasn't sure where it was. And he had to sort of, you see a little panic on his face and he has to find it. And then,
Mhm.
and it becomes a more authentic moment because in the same way, it's like that little line was blacked out for him.
Yeah, they did that to was it Sarah Snook or I might get it inverted or Jeremy Strong. They did that to one of the Succession cast in the big episode on the boat. Not spoiling it for anybody, right? But they just told, I can't remember, was it they made Jeremy Strong look for Sarah Snook or vice versa?
Gosh, I can't remember either.
Anyway, they made one look for the other. All they told them was the floor of the boat that they were on.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't
So
know
they
that.
went to them and they were basically like, okay, so say it was Jeremy. They were like, okay, so you're gonna look for Sarah. She's on the second floor of the yacht.
Good
We're
luck.
rolling,
Yeah.
right?
That's
The the
cool.
the behind the scenes of that episode is one of the most brilliant. They basically shot almost the entirety of that stuff as it were a play. They had reels of film hidden around the yacht, and they had, I think, 3 cameras rolling, and they were picking up people and moving around, and everybody just had to stay engaged, and everybody
Yeah.
had to stay involved with each other. And then you get performances like that, you get filmmaking like that because you have given your actors just that much more opportunity to just engage freely and humanely.
I always point out to people, like I was watching Adolescence, I think on Netflix, that
Oh,
does the same
yeah.
thing. And the entire episode is one take.
Mhm.
And I always point that out to people because you don't really understand how crazy it is that that's what they're doing, unless you're like live in this world, because it's
Hmm.
like everyone, if the camera just like goes like this or something by accident, they have to do the whole thing all over again. If
Yeah.
one person forgets their line, it's over. You got to go back to the beginning. If one
Mhm.
person didn't hit their mark, it's
Yeah.
over. They have to go back to the beginning. And so it's just so impressive to me that they do that. And I mean, obviously big budgets and professionals and everything, but still, it's really cool.
Yeah.
I wonder about if we can like zero in a little bit more on like the
Mm.
audition process, because
Right.
I know a lot of people go on auditions and it's very intimidating to a lot of people, especially if you're just starting out. Let's say your agent calls you, you get a script. What's the first thing you do? You read it? Do you come at it from character, from plot? What's the first thing you do?
So I've kind of adapted back to this idea a little bit of like the unreserved, sort of unapologetic nature of it all. So Lewis, the who founded the studio that I teach at, one of the things he's always referred to audition scripts is the first time you pick them up, it's sort of like untouched snow, right? Um, and so there's a couple different ways, depending on the nature of the project. There's a couple of different ways that I'll mentally sort of prepare. But the first thing that I usually do right out of the gate is I just read the sides, like the script, right? I don't even really take a look at character description or project breakdown really much of that information at that point because I want to be able to experience this scene for the first time for real for myself, right? Read it over a couple of times, kind of play with it a little bit, jot down some thoughts I have, jot down some gut reactions I have to things, and then sort of build out from there. Then as I get a little bit more comfortable with it, I start to mess about with information gathering, things that my character would know going into the scene, right? Even if I have a big confession in page three, right? From page one, that confession is going to be on my mind in some way, shape, or form,
Right.
right? Because that's how people work, right? I'm not coming into a conversation, a difficult conversation with a loved one, completely, I don't know what's going to happen, right? I'm coming in being like, I know I have to talk about this. This makes me feel this way, kind of building out from there. And then once I start to get that much more comfortable with kind of these ideas and the script and this information that I have, then, obviously the job is to actually tailor it a little bit to the project. So then I bring in, the info from the character breakdown and the script breakdown and stuff, the character description, excuse me, and the script breakdown to just sort of supplement that info. And funnily enough, one of the last things that I ever actually pay serious attention to is the quote unquote memorization.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because I have found and this is very much anecdotal, of course, as most things are with acting, right? 98% of acting exists in the gray area, I would say. Um, but I find the term itself doesn't help a ton other than just stress people out. Um, but it also puts this pressure or this weight on our lines. And like, look, the script is very important. You have to know your lines. That is the job. But when we focus so much of our energy just on the memorization, so much of the story gets lost. So much of the detail in stage direction, the detail in what's even said to you. Right? I'll have conversations with actors about scripts and they've come in and I'll ask them a question about their script. A question that can be answered probably by one of their lines or one of my lines. And they don't know what the answer is because the memorization has just become, if I just drill these words into my head, I can go into the room and regurgitate them back. Job done.
All right. So the memorization becomes a focal point and takes away from the story and the emotion
And the understanding,
and the understanding.
right? And the funny bit too, I find in this way and in this opportunity to play with, the story and the emotional elements and the understanding of it, then when I do actually sit down and be like, wait, do I know my lines? I already do.
Right, because you didn't it's not like a rote memory in the sense of like, oh, I'm just regurgitating. It's more of like an emotional memory because you know the emotional core of the scene and you're like, well, I'm feeling this because this is what's happening. And so even if you don't necessarily get every syllable correct, it's like you have the sense of what it is.
What's going on, right? Someone tells you a story. You didn't write the story down. You didn't read it over 10, 20, 30,000 times in an effort to regurgitate it back to someone else. You just listened to it. You understood it. You had thoughts and feelings and associations to it. Now, 2 weeks goes by and something happens, reminds you of that story. Now you're the one telling the story, right? So it's that much more the human kind of element to it, right? The way that we intake information as people and then share that information. The funniest bits sometimes are when an actor gets stuck on a line and I don't give it to them. I say, I'm going to go back on my line, and all I want you to do is take a breath and say the first thing that comes to your mind. I would say I'm probably batting around 85, 90% of the time. They absolutely nail the line on the repeat.
What do you think that is? Is that letting go of the stress of that moment and having the
In
freedom to make a mistake?
in my opinion, yeah. Right. It's, again, very anecdotal, but it goes back to the, like, even just our origin story, right? I watched a movie and I took it in and I enjoyed it and it made me feel a way. And then 2 weeks later, I'm still reciting the entirety of that movie back at my parents and I'm 11 years old, right? Because I don't have this thought in my head of like, memorize the lines, memorize the lines, memorize the lines.
Right. So do you think there is room for improvisation then? Like, there's so many different, I guess it depends on the sets and the vibe and everything.
Mhm.
But like there's shows like Curb where there's tons of the whole thing is improvisation. And then you also hear from writers who are like, I want my dialogue, word for word, that kind of more Aaron Sorkin
Yeah, I
style.
mean, you hit the nail on the head when you said it depends. Right? You have to be aware of what's going on, who you're working for, what the project is. You also have to be aware of your standing in it, right? Like if I'm showing up to do an episode of season 8 of a show, I'm gonna I'm gonna show up, I'm gonna hit my mark, I'm gonna say my lines, and I'm gonna do what I'm told, right? If I'm number one on the call sheet and have been for 3, 4 years, then I feel a little bit more like we can kind of have a discussion. Right.
Right.
And you've probably experienced this from the writing side too. And like I've experienced it from the actor side where like season 2 and 3 of shows that I've worked on, the writing has changed because they've gotten to know me and I've gotten to know them and we've worked together on it a little bit. Right. So there's all sorts of little kind of iterations with stuff like that. One of the coolest experiences I ever had in my life was on the set of What We Do in the Shadows. And I was like to the effect of like it was season 4, I think, and I was there for 2 days, so I was just kind of sitting quietly in the corner. But at one point, like I had an experience that people would probably pay thousands of dollars for, and I was getting paid for it. But it was literally we were on set and there was one joke that Jermaine just didn't like. He wrote it and it got out on its feet and he was just like, nah, there's something here. So for probably the next half an hour, I got to sit and watch Jermaine Clement, Natasha Demetriou, Matt Berry, Kevin Novak, and Mark Proch just develop a joke.
Wow.
And you're just like, okay, well, this is my job today.
I mean, that's an education right there.
Absolutely.
You
Right.
can't
And
pay for
so
that.
exactly. And so you see these kind of things happen as on sets and you're like, right, like obviously this again is the type of show that it is and the relationship that they all have with each other 100%. I certainly wasn't going to interject in any way. I was just going to watch these masters do their thing, but it's just another example and like you said another education in like getting onto a set and being able to work and play and explore rather than that, and it starts with your audition.
Yeah, and getting to know someone, like once you've been on set for a few years, for example, like we were on Naturally Sadie. I remember
Mm,
one thing that the showrunner Brent Piaskowski did. I don't know if he did it with everyone. I bet he did do it with everyone. I
mhm.
wonder if he did it with you. But something he did with me is he called me in and he was like, tell me about your life. Like, just what do you
Oh yeah.
like? What do you dislike? And then there was like a few things that ended up sneaking into the show because of stuff that I had mentioned. I think I had said, "Ooh, I'm getting my braces off next week and I'm excited," or whatever. And then like that was like the intro to one of my episodes about how I
Yeah.
was excited that I was getting my braces off or whatever. And so like really blurring the lines in a way between the actor and the character. Do you think
100%.
that that's a do you think that that's like a natural thing to happen? Is that a good thing, or is it like a way to get typecast if you're sort of always being this version of yourself?
I mean, again, it depends, right? No.
Yeah. No, it's true. I guess it does. Yeah.
Um, I think the thing that I find is obviously there people have experienced kind of typecasting things, and that's a very real part of the industry that we're in. Um, but if you give people an opportunity to explore, or as an actor, you give yourself an opportunity to explore who you are that much more openly and honestly, you realize that you're not just like one type of thing, right? And this conversation, even when looking at like character descriptions, right? Character descriptions, if you're lucky, will be like 4 or 5 sentences. You know, I have yet to meet a human being that I could confidently describe in 4 or 5 sentences, right? So there is for my money and from where I'm sitting, there is an opportunity to explore that and share that in your audition. I think it was Bryan Cranston. He talked about years back, like just this idea that that's what auditioning is. Auditioning is the job, first of all, and the audition is your opportunity to share your experience with this scene, with this work, with this experience. They like it, great. They like it and you're right for it, even better, right? But it starts with, again, that, kind of opportunity to be honest with yourself first and then build out from there.
I think I'm going to know the answer to this question based on sort of where you're coming from. But um, one thing that I used to do that I think was probably a mistake, and I explored because like when you're a kid, especially and you're auditioning, I mean, I never really went to acting school. I did like theater camp and stuff, but you're
Mhm.
sort of figuring it out on the fly. And I mean, we had an amazing acting coach on Naturally Sadie called named Natalie Toriel, who
Mhm.
is still an awesome acting coach. I should have her on too.
She's a director now too.
Right, and a director. But sort of in the audition process, I remember one thing that I used to do was I would do that rote memorization of lines. And
Mhm.
not only would I memorize the lines, but I would sometimes memorize the cadence in which I would say them. And so I would, you know, uh, do a like, oh, the comedic pause goes here, or like the my voice should go up a little bit when I say this, and I would memorize it to that extent. And then when I would put this performance on, and then the director or casting person would inevitably say, "Oh, that was great. Why don't you try it like this?" And then when they would throw that wrench in, it would
Mhm.
totally mess me up because I'm like, dude, I just practiced this one way of doing it 200 times.
Mhm.
So what I was doing it wrong.
Um, I mean, I hesitate to ever speak in absolutes with regards to acting, like I said, right?
Okay.
Like 90% of it exists in the gray area. I would say you weren't setting yourself up to be as as open and genuine at the time as you could have.
Yeah, I think I felt that too. And I learned very quickly that, oh, this is an evolving
Mhm.
thing. And so I can't be so rigid.
Absolutely. And it was something that, and it's probably something that a lot more actors go through than don't, right? I very vividly remember a very similar kind of feeling and experience with regards to memorization and like the fear of if I don't even have like the punctuation placed properly, then they're gonna know and they're gonna like, they're gonna launch me off the building. They're not even gonna say no, they're just gonna throw me out a window,
Right.
right? And now I'm just kind of like, I don't know. Scripts are written grammatically correctly because that's how it works. That's how grammar works. People don't speak grammatically correctly, right? Like if I had a line that was like, "What are you up to today, Mike?" right? That's what are you up to today, comma, Mike, question mark. If I come up to you and go, what are you up to today, Mike?
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because even as a writer, I am cognizant of that. And there's like certain times when, especially if there's a particular character, I will sort of either ignore or adjust the rules of grammar to make it, and maybe I'm like micromanaging the actor too much by doing this, but like, but there is some sense of like, oh, like I use ellipses a lot, like the dot dot
Mhm.
dot. And I think even though that's not like technically like correct, I think it's just sort of indicating that there's like a moment of pause here or a thought or a little bit of a contemplative second in between this line. And
Mhm.
and so I don't really get too hung, or I try not to get too hung up on the grammar, because you're right, people don't talk like that.
Mhm. I think too, right? Like where exactly the ellipses is, and you can, I'm curious your thoughts on this. Where exactly the ellipses is also adjustable,
Right.
right? And or you'll see sometimes you have to break up a line with a stage direction.
Yes.
And sometimes actors internalize that as I have to stop talking here, right? Because
Right.
the line's broken up, right? So like there's all of these concerns that we have that always just kind of boil down to our fear of getting it wrong.
Yeah, those little nuances are the thing I think that in part contribute to that inauthenticity that we're talking about, because it feels staged in a way or contrived, where it's like, and now he picks up his glass, right? And then he says the line. It's like people don't do that. They pick up the glass and drink and
And
keep
drink.
going and
Yeah.
whatever. I was speaking with Melanie Orr, who's a
Oh,
director.
nice. Yeah.
And one of the things she was saying was that, she would put, I forget the term she used, but she would like give actors stuff to do in the scene,
Hmm.
for lack of a better word, right? So it's like she would give them stuff to do so that it wasn't just two people like talking to each other. It was like a kid and an adult, and the kid was playing and not really paying attention, but still kind of like saying the line over here. And
Hmm.
but it just made it feel so much more authentic because that's reflective of real life. It's
How it works. It's the old director's joke in a way that is if you want a good performance out of an actor, give them something to do.
oh, I didn't know
Because
that.
because not only that, but also the physicality can help distract that sort of like conscious part of our brain that is like, what do I do as an actor? Am I getting my lines right? And like all of
Right.
those things, right? And Melanie was my script supervisor on Overruled. And I tell a story. I never say it's Melanie, but I tell stories when with regards to lines all the time. But it's like she had come up to me tons of times on Overruled and been like, "Hey, just real quick, doesn't matter. Uh, here's what the line is. Here's what you're saying, right? Doesn't matter. We just need it for continuity." And so sometimes I'd be like, "Oh yeah, no, the script is better." Or sometimes I'd be like, "I'm gonna stick with what I'm saying." Right? But even that kind of falls back to the conversation we had of like, I was number one on the call sheet on that show. I felt a little bit more inclined to be like, I would actually like to stick with this, thanks. Right? But every time she was like, doesn't matter, not a big deal. Here's what the script is. Here's what you're saying. I just need to make you just make my job easier as the script supervisor and say the same thing repeatedly. Right. So there you do find a lot more of the give and take and with stuff like that on sets than I think we allow ourselves to really acknowledge, certainly in the audition process. I've had casting directors tell me before. One particular one told me I was talking with them, a pretty good relationship with them, and just kind of what they're up to. And they were at the studio all day for a casting. Right? So like 10 to 5, let's say. Saw all their actors, sent their selects off to production. Next day, production called them. Hey, this project isn't a comedy. So 2 days later, that casting director was back. Right? There's sometimes there are these gaps in communication when you have a million people on a project, and sometimes people would just read things differently. Right? Again, so if it all boils down to you trying to get it right, now you're fighting a losing battle.
Yeah, it's less about getting it right, more about not being afraid to get it wrong, I think.
In a way, yeah, and it's also just being willing or being not afraid perfectly to be honest, right?
What do you think is harder, comedy or drama?
I'm a clown, so drama. Um,
I agree.
I've loved both, and I think what's becoming really interesting is this kind of bending of the genre that is happening now, right? You know, like you mentioned, Jim Carrey and Robin Williams were like two of my like this is why I want to do this because those guys would look like they're having so much fun, right? And then the second either one of them crossed over into drama, we were all like, wait, right? But now, you know, you have something like these projects, like something like The Bear, which wins a comedy award and has like some really funny bits in it and like genuine laugh out loud moments, but is also a lot,
Yeah.
right? And it's just been really interesting to kind of see how the genres aren't so rigidly defined anymore. So actors now have to be ready. But I think what's kind of becoming really cool is as these stories are getting blended that little bit more, we're taking sort of like dramatic writing cues for comedies and comedic writing cues for dramas, so we can approach them in a very similar way as an actor. And a lot of the times, even just sort of with our comedies, like people in those comedies aren't having a great time.
Right.
They don't exist in a comedy in the way that traditionally in like the late 80s, early 90s, actors existed in comedies, right? These people are having a genuinely upsetting time. It's just that the situation is so ridiculous that it kind of makes us laugh. I've started talking about like current film and television comedy almost in the way that we used to talk about like late 80s, early 90s stand-up, which was just that it's funny because it's true,
Yeah,
right?
there's definitely been a blending of the genre. And one that comes to mind for me is I recently watched A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which is
Mhm.
like the spin-off Game of Thrones. And
Mhm.
it's like a lighter, it's in that same universe, but it's like a lighter, silly, sillier kind of vibe. But also there's like blood and gore and and stuff like that. So it's like it's a really interesting acting role for those characters because it's like you have to play both sides of that.
Mhm. Yeah, and you see like, you know, in the television world, like projects that somebody like Michael Schur is putting out, like something like The Good Place.
Yeah.
You know, these like deep, profound. I have his book somewhere on this shelf here of like his musings on ethics that he, you know, learned while writing the show. And
Right.
then you have these like deeply profound, beautiful moments in this television show. And then you also have a thing where William Jackson Harper is in a like bright purple tank top at the front of his university class that he's lecturing, making chili with marshmallow peeps. You know?
Yeah.
And so you have to like again, and I can apologize if I'm sounding kind of like a broken record a little bit, but it again, it's like these things are just they're so earnest. They're so honest. They're just these like very clear views of the human condition in a lot of ways, regardless of the sort of like, you know, fantasy or sci-fi or kind of context to them. That's the script's job,
Yeah. And
right?
even from a writing perspective, something that I often hear is that like if you want to write a good comedy, write it as a drama first and then put the jokes in after.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of hard to believe that if you grew up watching shows like Ace Ventura and so on, because you're like, there's no drama in this. But
Yeah.
at its core, there kind of is. There's stakes. There's
Mhm.
always stakes. And even if the stakes are silly or dumb, the people in the movie or show take those stakes deeply seriously. And
Yeah.
that's where some of the comedy comes from.
Absolutely. You know, I was working, this was a few years ago. I remember working with an actor who did really want to work comedy. And I basically they gave them the scene from Bridesmaids where they're on the plane and like the help me I'm poor and
Right.
all this. And this actor, God bless them, for the life of them could not break out of their like best Kristen Wiig impression.
Mhm.
And then we just kind of went, okay, hang on a sec. What's going on here? Right, what's really going on in this scene? You're deeply, deeply insecure and really scared you're losing your best friend and also your own drugs. And we ran it back and I almost felt like I had to apologize to her at the end because she like just tears streaming down her face, like having such a bad time. And it was so funny, right? And there's just that, like, there's that something to be said for just, opening up yourself to the possibility that you are going to behave irrationally in an irrational situation. And that's okay, because that's what people do. Right? We can all look at characters and expect them to behave ways, but they don't. Why don't they? Because they're people. People don't always follow expectations as much as we would like to as ourselves or like them to as others. Right? We have to kind of give ourselves a little bit of permission to let the invasive thought win out sometimes too. When acting, clear,
Yes.
clear as a bell, only when acting.
Thank you for that
Out
clarification.
in your day-to-day life, please continue to be as good a human being as you possibly can.
Jake, I want to ask you about your role on Overruled a little
Mhm.
bit, just because, that was such an iconic show. And that was soon after, say, around 2007,
Seven or eight, I
7
think.
or 8.
Yeah.
And so you did that show, and then years later, recently, you
Mhm.
reprised the role of Jared on Life with Luca, which was a TV movie that was sort of like I guess like a sequel to the Life with Derek,
Show, yeah.
the show. So what was it like to reprise that role like 10 years later?
It was so fun, right? So Jeff Biederman, who created both shows, I get an email one day that's basically like, "Hey, I have this idea." And always when Jeff emails me, I'm like, "Okay, what do we got?" But he's like, "I've got this idea. There's this one scene in Life with Luca, where Casey, so Ashley Leggett, um, her character, I guess Jeff had a real thing for lawyers at some point because they turned Casey into a lawyer. And he goes, I've got this one scene where Casey's kind of making like a bit of a fool of herself in judges' chambers, and there's an opposing attorney who's just like kind of needling her a bit. Um, I think it would be really funny if you did it. Are you interested in any way?" And I immediately, like, I didn't reply immediately, but immediately I was like, "Are you kidding me? Yes, of course, I would love to do that." But I did the thing that actors are supposed to do, and I called my agent. And we discussed it, right? And they were like, "There's, you know, industry nonsense, whatever." But then eventually she was just like, "Bottom line, like, do you really want to do this?" I was like, "Yeah, like that sounds so fun." And I've known Ashley since the Sadie days, right? So like, I immediately emailed Jeff back after this phone call with my agent, and then immediately after emailing Jeff back, I messaged Ashley, and it was basically a day, and this was kind of like how fondly I even look back at some of the Sadie days, and even with Overruled too, right? It was a day where I got to like show up to work and just kind of mess around with my friends,
Yeah,
and I think amongst everything, yes, this is a very serious, it is a very large, it is a very money heavily involved industry. So of course that leads to some very serious things. And of course there are very serious projects, and all of this is all very serious. But also at the end of the day, we don't fall into this stuff by accident, right? We start doing this, especially when we started as kids, because it was fun,
yeah.
and I don't even think any part of me, this may sound bad. I don't think any part of me was concerned with acting that day on that set. But I was just like, I was there, and the way that the script was written, and I had gotten, so when Jeff first emailed me, he sent me the script, and then I had gotten the revisions, and it felt really kind of cool because in the revision the character's name actually then changed from like just opposing counsel to actually Jared. But even some of the lines were just tweaked ever so slightly, right? And again, this goes back to our thing of like, Jeff knows me. And so that once I was attached to it, he was like, "Okay, I can, bring that voice in a little bit, like, the excellent and accomplished writer that he is, uses his actors in the way that he knows how to." Right?
That's
And
so
it just,
cool.
yeah, it was, I think I was there for maybe 4 or 5 hours that day, and like just laughing for most of it.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of, it wasn't a big of a gap, but after Naturally Sadie, I did a guest spot on a show called The Latest Buzz.
Mm-hmm.
and it was filmed, I think, in the same school that we filmed in. It was this many of the same crew,
Hmm.
and a lot of the same writers and stuff. So it was this very odd experience where I was just like coming back to hang out with my friends and like just
Hmm.
have fun. So yeah, that's awesome that you got to do that.
I uh I shot the pilot for that
That's right.
three days after we wrapped Sadie Forever.
Oh my gosh, that's right. Back when it was called something else,
Uh
Glimmer,
Glimmer,
right?
yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so we wrapped Sadie Forever on the Friday. That Sunday, I was back at the school at the studio, uh, dyeing my hair black because it was all of the same people involved, and they were like, "Well, we need to make you look completely different." And like, "What do you think about dyeing your hair black?" And my agent at the time was like, "Don't you friggin' dare." And I was like, "Yeah, but I'm gonna." Um, and yeah, so yeah, like all again, right? Like Brent Piaskowski was the one attached to that. So, being able to just kind of like step in and like you probably experienced as well, like that comfort of working with people that and know you feel that much more, kind of open and free to play.
All right, I want to switch gears a little bit because I do want to talk about the elephant in the room. That is the industry disruptor.
Yeah.
That is AI.
Hmm.
We're seeing AI clips now of Wolverine and the Hulk fighting each other, and Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise in an action sequence. And I mean, it's only getting better. And I
Hmm.
wonder, do you think is it a threat to actors? Do you think it's like a ticking time bomb? Do you recommend people even still dream about being an actor? Like, what is your take on AI?
I've been thinking about this since we've been emailing. I don't, I try very hard to not get involved in it.
Mm,
And what I mean by that is, it is a thing. It's out there in the world and it's being used in all sorts of ways, shapes, or forms. Um, a big part of the last SAG strike was to deal with, performers' identity rights, which I can't believe I'm having to say out loud. Right? Like you're a person, you should be able to own your own identity. Um, the thing for me, once it started to get into this, like, like with the clips that you mentioned and stuff, all that made me want to do is just train and coach harder and just get better and just show people that, like, we've just spent the last hour basically talking about like authentic human experience,
yeah.
and that's why we watch film and television. And I think if you are actually looking close enough, like, I've not seen the Wolverine one. I saw probably 10, 15 seconds of the Brad Pitt, Tom Cruise one. And it felt, I don't know, maybe because I knew what it was, but it felt soulless.
There is definitely a little uncanny valley in there still, a little bit of
Yeah.
something that just doesn't quite feel right, whether it's in the performance or the directing or whatever it may be. But
Hmm.
just seeing where it came from with Will Smith eating that spaghetti a couple of years ago to now, it's the rate at which it's getting better makes me pause a little bit and go, okay,
Mhm.
what is the sort of role of human beings going to be in
Mhm.
filmmaking moving forward,
Ideally, I mean, I don't know. But ideally, it will continue to just press people to want to tell stories as openly and authentically as they can and be unafraid to share. Like look at even just the evolution of television in the last 5, 10 years. Right? You're having major film stars want to work in television now.
Yeah,
And like when we were growing up, like that was not,
it was the opposite.
you did not do that. What are
Yeah,
you, crazy? And I think there will always be technological advancements, right? Acting has gotten a lot more specific and a lot more like hyper fixated on authenticity and realism because cameras are so good, right? And you can trace all sorts of careers either ending or flourishing back to technological advances. Charlie Chaplin didn't make it out of the silent film era, right?
right.
So, and all of the ramifications, sociopolitically aside of my feelings of the use of AI and in the lack of permissions involved, and just the sheer vast amount of energy that it uses, is just this idea that if we want to tell real human stories, at the end of the day, I don't think, and maybe this is me just kind of pie in the sky, but I'm going to continue to think this because it's my job too, and because I love what I do. I don't think you can fully replace actual human authenticity and experience.
I agree with you. And I think this has come up on the podcast before because I interview a lot of creatives. And I think
Mhm.
there's just something that, like, I would rather watch a movie with real humans in it.
Yeah.
And maybe that cultural zeitgeist will change over time, but
Mhm.
that's certainly how I feel right now. And I think AI can be used as a tool to make things cheaper, to open filmmaking to more people because there are financial barriers in a lot of
Mhm.
cases. In the same way, an iPhone made it easier to film a short film.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that that's the direction that AI is going to go.
Mhm.
That would be my ideal.
And I think too, one of my fears with it is that it'll be used just to save money and cut people out of jobs,
It will definitely be used for that.
right? And
Yeah.
that's not, even, we talk about like film and television stuff, but and you've done it, right? Like animation, there's still a person behind that voice, and there is still a quality I mean, look, we're in this weird kind of crazy era of the most popular form of music media that people are buying now is vinyl again,
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
right? Because you've got all of you've got your subscription services, sure, and then you've got these people basically being like, okay, well now I have the subscription service, it's paying the artists nothing. Um, but also sonically on some level, there's a difference.
Yeah, not only that, but I think there's also sort of this reverting back to like physical stuff
Hmm.
again. It's like, Netflix, sure, you can watch anything on demand that you want, but then also if they decide to stop hosting your favorite movie, you just don't have it
It's
anymore.
gone. Yeah.
Right. And so this idea of like owning records or owning DVDs again is starting to come back, I feel like.
I really think that the ultimate goal of storytelling is, it should be at least, human engagement, human association and interaction. And if we want to continue to make stories that people are interested in and want to engage with on any level, putting a bunch of slop at them is not gonna do it. Maybe it is. I don't know.
No, I'm with you. I agree. And we're probably biased because we're in the industry. And I'm sure there's some
Me,
guy
no,
who
never been biased in my life.
I'm sure there's some guy who's like, well, I just want to see Wolverine fight the Hulk more. I don't care if it's AI or not. But
Yeah.
and maybe that there is a place for that, and maybe there will be. But I think there's never going to be able to replace the human element of it. That's just my take.
Mhm. Glad we agree.
Yeah. I like to end the podcast by asking about a time you stepped outside of your comfort zone, and it can be either personally or professionally, and how that changed your life. Does something come to mind?
The first time that I ever pulled the trigger on a solo travel,
Oh, interesting. Where did you go?
I went to Indonesia, and it wasn't really by design that way. As you are well aware, my schedule was freer than my friends. But I had a very good friend at the time who was going to school in Australia. And the plan had always been to go at some point to see him for a couple of weeks. But I figured while I was over there, gonna look into some stuff. And so we got messaging back and forth, and I was thinking, I was 23, so like any 23-year-old does, I'm like, oh, Thailand's got to be number one on the list to travel to. And he was like, well, here would be a really great time to visit me. He had like 2 weeks off after finals kind of thing. And it just didn't really work out with flights and accommodation and stuff like that. So I started kind of out to the scope and ended on Indonesia. And I think just the appreciation for, this is going to sound cliche as hell, the appreciation for just life, the appreciation for being able to go and experience different cultures that I had not been able to, and experience what people are like in such an extremely different part of the world than again, I grew up in a town of 14,000 people. And now I'm spending a night alone in a city of, I think Jakarta at the time had 20 million.
Oh,
And it was also Ramadan. And I was unaware of that. And so at 4:30-ish, 5 o'clock in the morning, the call to prayer comes up over the loudspeakers on around the city so that they can have their meal before fasting for the day. And it was just like, it's unlike anything you're gonna get even in Toronto. And so that, I think what became really interesting about that is like that curiosity leads to so many discoveries, personally, professionally, relationship wise. Um, and that really changed kind of my outlook on how I not just viewed acting, of course, like to make it obviously like a little bit more specific to me, of course, like that expanded my capacity for curiosity and empathy, absolutely. But just as a person, right? We can get really, really focused on what we're doing in our day to day and the like immediate kind of around us. But especially if we're going to act and we're going to tell stories that we, you know, haven't experienced one to one firsthand, then the curiosity has to be there. Um, that was just cool. This is a really cool place to go.
yeah, that sense of curiosity is so important to cultivate and to hang on to because it's
Mhm.
easy, like you said, to sort of get lost in the stuff you're doing and your immediate surroundings. But not only as a creative person, but I think just as a human,
Mhm.
having a sense of curiosity, whether it's about cultures or art or whatever the thing that floats your boat is, having that, keeping that sense of curiosity, I think is really important.
Mhm.
And that's part of the mantra of why I started this podcast too, because it was
Cool.
like, I really wanted to explore creativity and personal growth through this lens of curiosity. And so, yeah, I really resonate with that.
Cool, man.
Well, Jacob, thank you for being here and having this discussion with me.
Of course, it was my pleasure. That was a lot of fun, man.